Welcome to the Mormon Environmental Stewardship Alliance podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Foster. Today we talk with MESA Treasurer Soren Simonsen. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Soren Simonsen. I am an architect and urban planner by profession and background. I currently work for an organization called the Jordan River Commission in the Salt Lake Public Agency, working to improve and conserve and restore the Jordan River Parkway, which is about a 50-mile linear nature preserve between Utah Lake and the Great Salt Lake. I've been involved with the Mormon Environmental Stewardship Alliance from its outset in the late 2000s, and helped organize and kind of establish MESA as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and have also been involved in a lot of the development of the organization over the last decade. From fundraising and friend-raising to building membership and helping bring greater visibility to the organization by reaching out and meeting with elected officials and convening members of the organization and friends and allies to help accomplish a number of projects and programs and conduct outreach in the community.
Why, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do you care about the climate crisis?
I would say that the climate crisis is indicative of a much bigger challenge, which is how do we care for the earth, which is a gift from God that was intended to sustain life and allow each individual the opportunity to come to earth, to live, to grow, to develop, and to find a path back to our heavenly parents. And we know that the earth sustains all kinds of life, and many forms of life today are in jeopardy, including human life, because of a lot of disregard for how we treat this amazing gift. And the climate crisis deals particularly with the atmosphere, but its symptoms are evident in all kinds of areas, from water scarcity and drought and famine to an overabundance of water with storm surges and rising sea levels, to wildfires and the continuing damage to the atmosphere and the air we breathe. And so there's just a lot of issues that are kind of embodied in the climate crisis that are indicative of much bigger issues with how do we care for this amazing creation.
How is the climate crisis related to specific pieces of doctrine or specific commandments, and what responsibility do we have with the knowledge of the gospel? What responsibility do we have to combat it?
Well, I like to go back to the original commandment that was given to the human race and all of mankind in the instructions to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when they were told to dress the garden and by extension to care for the earth. And all of their posterity, which includes people living across the planet today, have that responsibility to care for each other and to care for the earth that sustains life. And we're not only given the responsibility to care for the earth, but for all living things that we have stewardship and dominion over. And so, looking at all of the ways that we impact our environment that have been damaging to the earth and create some catastrophic consequences in the way we treat each other, for me, that just underscores the importance of what we're doing to not only be aware of, but I think, and I believe in my heart, that we should be leading the movement, as Elder Neil A. Maxwell said, to be constant environmentalists. Looking at all of the ways that we can address the needs of life and life-sustaining systems, and how those affect how we care for each other as well.
And when we talk about the climate crisis, it's often doom and gloom. But what are some exciting things happening that you're seeing in regards to climate change?
Well, it's kind of interesting thinking about this in the context of our course of study in Come Follow Me, which is the church's program for personal, family, and ward, Sunday school, and other teaching programs in the church. Just in the last couple of weeks, we studied Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, which talks about some of the signs of the times, if you will, symptoms of what we see in the earth. And it's very explicit, some of the ideas presented about famine and drought and storms and tempests, and even the seas heaving beyond their bounds, are some of the little descriptions of this time that we're living in. And yet that section also contains a lot of faith promoting ideas about how we should conduct ourselves. Jesus, when he was on the earth, also described some of those same things in Matthew 24, and described both in Matthew 24 and in Matthew 25, as well as John 13, what the remedy to this time is. And that is to love each other deeply and to give of ourselves to helping, supporting, lifting, and preparing. And so I take from all of those directions, from the parable of the 10 virgins to the parable of the sheep and the goats, to the direction in Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, and other sections, that the way we prepare is to give of ourselves and serve. And that's not only serving each other in humanitarian ways, but it's also serving each other by how we care for the life-sustaining systems on the earth. The outlook may not look good, because we read in the scriptures what this time will look like. But I also read that with a lens of faith, that if I am engaged in loving and serving others and caring for creation, that very first commandment given to Adam and Eve, that's how I prepare myself for this time and demonstrate my faith. And that means speaking out and speaking up. It means being engaged in a political sense, because we know that public policies affect a lot of the things that we can or should be doing. And I imagine this time that we're in is a lot like the time that Mormon found himself in the Book of Mormon. But we don't give up because the work is hard. We push harder because the work is hard. We do more. And that really is what drives me, is this desire to be engaged in the most important work that we can be doing right now. And the flip side of that is that when Christ comes, there will be 1,000 years of peace. And I believe, in my testimony, is that time is a time when we will be restoring the earth to a state of paradise, like it was when Adam and Eve first began their mission and their lives. And that means we should be learning those skills of how to restore a damaged earth following the destruction that mankind creates. And that also gives me tremendous hope and desire, because those skills that we learn about caring for creation and caring for the earth will be the most essential skills in restoring the earth back to a paradisical state.
What do you wish you saw more of? What do you think the church can be doing as an organization? What can members be doing as individuals? What should we be doing in our communities and more on a ward level? What sorts of things do you want to see happen in regards to many environmental issues, but most specifically in regards to combating climate change?
Well, I'd love to see the church speaking more directly about this part of our stewardship. We see incredible work, humanitarian work the church does in response to natural disasters. The church volunteers, the organization and the structure of the church, the tremendous contributions through fast offerings and tithes and other contributions allow the church to always be at the front lines in responding to natural disasters, political upheaval, all kinds of catastrophic events, be they political or natural or whatever they might be. I would love to see us talking about not only those kinds of responses, but how we address many of these through preventive kinds of actions. We know that the intensity of storms, just this last week, we've watched Hurricane Isla slam into Louisiana on the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And I happened to be in New Orleans just a couple of weeks after Hurricane Katrina and witnessed just the unbelievable devastation of that storm. And by all accounts, the one that we're witnessing right now, this in 2021, is even more impactful than that storm was. And we know that will continue. And if we're not talking about, how we combat the root causes of climate change, then I think we've missed a huge opportunity. So that's one thing I would love to see the church doing, is not only working on the symptoms and the outcome, but also working at the forefront of how we combat it. There has been great work since MESA was organized formally back in 2012, 2013, when we officially created the organization structure and became a nonprofit organization. We've seen a large number of resources that the church has developed. We've been involved in some conversations with some of the church's public affairs and communications, have supported and shared resources that they've put up on the website and in the church newsroom. And so it's really encouraging, even elements working their way into church curriculum. So it's encouraging to see that. It's still not an emphasized topic. Environmental stewardship and conservation generally, and climate change specifically. But there is some encouraging signs that that's continuing to become more elevated. And we'll continue to support that as an organization, and we'll continue to be champions of what the church has published as an organization that promotes and particularly works to bring these ideas and concepts to those that are elected to represent us, especially those that may be Latter-day Saints serving in federal, state, local government positions where they can really be influencers.
One of our areas of interest at MESA is water quality and conservation. And why, in your opinion, is protecting water so important, and why should we emphasize it as an organization?
Well, water is one of these just most fundamental things related to life on Earth. When you read the story of the creation in the Old Testament and in the books of Moses and Abraham, in Latter-day Saint Scripture, it's amazing how central to everything having to do with the creation water is. Before there was earth, before there was land, before there was life, there was water. And the theme and the story of water is integrated throughout the entirety of the story of the creation. And that's not only water, seas and oceans, but it's the water in the firmament or in the atmosphere that brings water to the earth in the form of precipitation, and rivers and streams that support all kinds of diversity of wildlife and support all kinds of life-sustaining sources like agriculture and food that Adam and Eve were expected to develop and utilize to support life of humans. So water is just really central. You think about the ways that it's reflected in ordinances, baptism by immersion, the ordinance of the sacrament where we partake of bread and water as emblems. When you think about sacred temple rituals and rites, such as washings and anointings, and there are just so many places in the symbols of our faith and the doctrines that Jesus taught. He described himself as the living water. He used water as a symbol in many parables. There are just lots of references to it throughout all of the Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon. I think of the waters of Mormon, where that band of Christians were baptized as a demonstration of their faith. There are just so many times when water is really central to teaching and to stories. So, I think there's a reason why we use water so symbolically in our faith, because it is so essential to life that that you can't have one without the other.
And in terms of conservation, why is it important to conserve waterways beyond the basic needs of water for life and for growing crops and drinking water? Like, what are some of the intrinsic values of waterways and different bodies of water?
Well, we often as humans become very self-centered on our needs, and we forget that it wasn't just humans that were commanded to multiply, but all of the wildlife on Earth was commanded to multiply as well. And for me, this just shows how critical the work that we do in environmental stewardship and conservation is. We know that because of water depletion, because of a lot of industrial practices, and the use of water or overuse of water, aquifers, lakes, and rivers that are polluted and damaged beyond their life-sustaining value have had enormous impacts. The decimation of wetlands and riparian areas, forest fires that are becoming more intense because of climate change. All of these things are devastating to wildlife. And many prophets, I can think specifically of commentaries by Spencer W. Kimball and Joseph Fielding Smith, where they talked about the sanctity not only of human life, but of all life, and that taking life is a sin. And when you think of the devastating consequences of water, disrupting water systems and ecological systems that support other life forms, those are all forms of sin. And so it's not only conserving water and making sure that it's available for those life-sustaining needs that it supports, but it's also preserving and improving the quality of water. because there are so many things that happen in modern life that have been really detrimental to the quality of water, to the point that it's not meeting the needs. I'll share a experience I had that was really profound for me when I was a teenager. My father was our scoutmaster. I lived in Central Texas in Austin at the time. And for one of our scout kind of high adventure trips, I think I was maybe 15 at the time, we traveled from Austin up north up to the Boundary Waters, north of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in Minnesota, and spent about 2 weeks in the Boundary Waters, traveling from lake to lake, portaging in between in a small fleet of canoes with our scout troop. And I remember when we left the base camp, after we'd stocked supplies and got our tents and everything that we needed, the canoes and all of that, I was a little bit alarmed because we left and we didn't have anything more than the thermoses or the canteens that we had with our backpacks. And I remember asking our tour guide and travel guide, where do we get water from? We didn't pack water purification. We didn't pack, big containers to store water. And we were in the canoes at the time, and he pulled out a cup and he dipped it in the lake, and he took a drink of it and said, we have all of the clean water that we need. And, I lived in an area of the country in Central Texas where we had lots of water. It was abundant, all of the rivers that traverse across the Central and East Texas region. But that was not something we did. You didn't drink the water in those rivers, not without treating it first. And so to see that, where there were places where the water was so pure and so clear that you could drink it from the source was just amazing to me. And you can't do that today, even in those Boundary Waters. You certainly can't do it in the Jordan River, which is the river that I'm most familiar with right now, because levels of pollution and impacts have become so severe that even swimming in a place like the Jordan River in Utah is considered an unsafe activity in many areas of the Jordan River. And so, these things are, ideas that I've had for a long time. And one of the reasons why I became so engaged in the work that I'm doing around water quality and conservation activities and urban development, and that interface between where and how we live and what we do to the environment through our lives and our lifestyles, which are very consumer focused and very environment unfocused. And I think that has to change because the impacts are just tremendous. And both the quantity of water in places like the Jordan River and the quality of water have been just so depleted and impacted by the ways that we develop and build our cities. It's just a train wreck in the future if we don't change some of our habits.
What advice would you give to individuals who are, concerned about how we use our water and how natural waterways are disrupted and natural bodies of water and natural water processes are disrupted? What advice would you give to someone for them to change their personal habits, and also to what they can do as an advocate?
Two things come to mind in terms of our relationship with water. First of all is how we use water. Obviously, we need water to sustain life. And so ensuring that we have clean drinking water and, looking at ways we can support communities around the world that don't have access to clean drinking water, supporting those initiatives, whether it's through contributions or humanitarian work. There's a lot of people that are really interested in seeing that developing countries have access to clean and safe drinking water, which is that foundation for human life and other life. But So we often overuse this limited resource. And in places like Utah and the Western US, where water is scarce and becoming scarcer, even as communities are experiencing incredible growth, means that we have to think differently about water. So a couple of observations. One is, look at the landscapes that our Father in heaven and our Savior and Creator created, and look for ways to mimic those landscapes. We import water intensive turf and sod and other kinds of materials to support a lifestyle where, yes, they're lovely to look at, but do we actually need that much grass to support recreation and activities around our homes? There's some great programs that demonstrate how to convert heavily turf lawns into drought tolerant, and they can be just as beautiful. You go to a meadow that's full of wildflowers and grasses in a naturally non-irrigated place, and we think these places are lovely, and why can't we have some of that loveliness in our own homes? Put in turf and grass where you need that for recreation and certain kinds of activities, but adapt your lawn to something more like what it would be in a natural setting. And I think we'll find that those natural settings can be just as lovely as heavily manicured landscapes, and use a fraction of the water. On the water quality side, I think one thing that many people don't often realize is how connected we are. You may not live near a lake or a river or a stream, but almost every city in every corner of the world that has paved streets and buildings, those impervious surfaces often drain into a storm system that goes right into the natural waterways. Storm drains and underground conduits and pipes and culverts all drain into those natural waterways. And so when you accumulate leaves and organic matter, when you have litter and chemicals that land on those impervious surfaces, when it rains or snows, you wash all of that material into your watershed, and the consequences are pretty severe. In the Jordan River here in Utah, for example, when we get a big rainstorm, and we've had a lot of pretty intense rainstorms recently, impacted obviously by the climate crisis, that sends all of that material down. In a natural setting, 90% of the water would percolate naturally into the ground, and some of it, a small percentage of it, would run off. In an urban area, it's just the opposite. About 90% of the water goes into a storm system, and about 10% of it goes into the limited permeable surfaces in yards and parks and things like that. And so when you get those big storm events, you just get a flush of, kind of instant flooding, but it's carrying all of this organic matter and debris and pollutants with it. And so it's kind of a double whammy. The organic matter, the microorganisms that decompose that organic matter produce a lot of methane, which we know is a toxic climate change gas. And they also suck all of the oxygen out of the water. So fish and other aquatic wildlife have to experience oxygen depletion after these big storm events because of that big flush of organic matter. And then of course you get all of the other visible elements, slime on the surface from oils and other chemicals, tin cans and paper wrappers and plastic and bottles and all kinds of things that get washed down our storm systems, and just create a real visual blight in many of our natural waterways. We've seen the impacts of plastic in the ocean, where these super floating masses of plastic have accumulated and have created huge environmental risks and concerns to wildlife in the ocean. So, all of those are ways that we can get involved, and it's just being aware. Look for ways to transpose your landscape, look for ways to allow more water that falls on your property to percolate into the ground, create bioswales, and use the open space, the green spaces, the lawns and the yards on your home or business or church or school, wherever they happen to be, and use those in ways that support creating a healthier ecosystem by sending less stormwater into the storm system, and then paying attention to what's on the pavement around you and making sure that it's clean and clear of those things that become toxic when they get into the storm system. Encourage anybody who's listening to become aware and engaged. I certainly invite all of those Latter-day Saints and friends and allies who are concerned about our ecological footprint to help us with this movement to raise awareness, both in the Latter-day Saint community and in our communities and in the world at large, to be just exemplary environmental stewards and conservation advocates, and to get out and get involved in conservation and stewardship activities and make a difference wherever you are. We need every voice and every shoulder to the wheel to make a difference in the world today.
If you would like to learn more about our organization and the work we do, visit our website at mesastewardship.org. You can also find us on all social media platforms at MESA Stewards. See you next time.